causes all except the saints to worship the first beast, performs miracles and calls fires down from heaven. Followers are marked on their forehead or their hand. Its number is 666. These are the identifiers. All elements apply only to the global fulfillment. Only some of the elements apply to the regional fulfillment. So let's look at this dual fulfillment. Lesser regional versus greater global. A national regional power arising near the end of the 1260-year prophecy, which is sometime around 1798. The global worldly one. Sometime after the wounded power has been healed. So sometime after 1929. For the prophecy says the beast told them to build an image in honor of the beast that had been wounded by the sword and yet lived or had its wound healed. So sometime after 1929, the greater global fulfillment will happen. Arises from the earth. What does the earth represent? Well, in Scripture, Revelation 17:15 tells us that the waters that you saw where the prostitute sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and languages. So water represents people, populations, then earth represents relative less water. So a regional fulfillment would be, arises from the earth, would be a power arising around 1790s in a relatively sparse, unpopulated part of the world that hasn't really been civilized or developed yet. The greater global power, though, will rise without human support. Their power does not derive from the people. Two lamb-like horns. Another clue, remember, is our theme of Scripture. Our theme, war in heaven, and sinned, Messiah promised, Old Testament focus on the avenue through which Messiah will come. New Testament Bible prophecy focuses on those who carry the gospel forward. And then Revelation 13 focuses specifically on the wounded head, that one false head, where it is attacking the saints who are trying to advance the gospel. That's what we identified last week and had power for 1,260 months. And that's the first beast of Revelation, persecuting the saints. Revelation focuses our attention on the people advancing the gospel. That's why it identifies the papal head in the Dark Ages. And this theme continues with the next beast with lamb-like horns that rises with lamb-like principles to try and resist the power of the beast that's persecuting the saints. But this power, initially trying to give us that protection, will eventually become dragon-like. And so I think you can figure out that a national power that arose in the 1790s in a relatively unpopulated part of the world is the United States, and it arose with two lamb-like principles, religious liberty and civil liberties. The Declaration of Independence, 1776, but the Bill of Rights was written in 1789, and it wasn't ratified until 1791. So we're right in the time frame of the Bible prophecy here, and we have the elements of a civil power, a national power arising that appears to be lamb-like and protecting the saints from religious persecution. Specifically, the Bill of Rights, ratified in 1791. If you ever identified the Bill of Rights, but most of the protections in the Bill of Rights were specifically constructed by the founders of this country to protect from the Roman inquisitor. The inquisitor was empowered by the Roman Church to do the Inquisition. And if the inquisitor came and found you guilty, then the power of the state was used to enforce the inquisitor's ruling that you're a heretic and you would be imprisoned or burned at the stake. And so the first was separation of church and state, that a church cannot use state power to enforce its dogma. That was the first thing to protect us from. The second, freedom of speech. Under the Dark Ages, you could not criticize the church. You criticize the church, that's heresy, that's blasphemy, and there's many cases of people being actually tortured, imprisoned, and executed for criticizing the church. You didn't have freedom of press. You couldn't actually publish. In fact, who was the first person reformer who translated the Bible into English?
Wycliffe.
Wycliffe, thank you. Wycliffe, what happened to Wycliffe? He was burned at the stake for translating the Bible. No freedom of the press. You can't do that. The church has to give you permission. right to remain silent. Have you heard of your Fifth Amendment? You have the right to remain silent. You ever heard of that? If you're under the inquisitor and the inquisitor asks you a question and you refuse to answer, that's an admission of guilt. So you either answer or your silence is taken as an admission of guilt. So a specific right was put in that you have the right to remain silent and you will not be considered guilty. Further, if you're under the inquisitor, you're soon to be guilty and you have to prove your innocence. The Constitution Bill of Rights, you're presumed to be innocent and the prosecutor has to prove you're guilty. And you have the right to privacy, to not have your private belongings and spaces searched without warrant. The inquisitor could come in at any time and search your property and search your home without any due process whatsoever. And so the Bill of Rights, the civil and religious liberties, by the rising power in the new world in a relatively unpopulated place, was specifically designed to protect from the persecution of the chameleon beast and provide civil and religious liberties. But this beast, those lamb-like horns, will eventually speak like a dragon and use all the powers of the first beast and will deceive, will coerce, will use force, will restrict liberties. Has the United States used all 10 of these powers?
Absolutely. Since breakfast.
So the identifiers arises near the end of the 1260 years, near 1798, arises from the earth, unpopulated regions. So the identifiers of the United States is the lesser fulfillment that meets both of those. 2 lamb-like horns, religious and civil liberties, meets that. Theme of Scripture is advancing the gospel. The Bill of Rights specifically designed to protect from religious persecution, to protect religious liberty or from persecution, and then uses the 10 beastly powers to restrict liberties and speaks like a dragon. Has the United States, despite our constitutional protections of religious liberties and civil liberties, restricted those liberties? Have you seen that?
Yes.
Have we seen houses of worship closed, businesses shut down, travel restricted, speech censored, and consciences coerced? Have we seen that?
Yes.
And have we seen this done under the guise of needing to save lives? In other words, under the pursuit of so-called righteousness or justice?
Yes.
Get your mind around that. So the USA is the lesser regional fulfillment of the second beast. And if that is so, then what is the greater, who or what is the greater global fulfillment? That's our next question. So lesser regional, a power rising near the end of the 1260 years. The greater global arises after the wound is healed, after 1929. Arises in unpopulated area, the lesser regional. The greater global arises without human empowerment. Doesn't need humanity or populations or human governments to